fun. We have a small group, so everybody can be on the hot seat today. Um, what I want to talk about today is how to build teams that are way smarter than the individuals in the team. So I'll start with this story. Back in 1905, they had the World Fair in Chicago, Illinois, and at the entrance to the World Fair, they had this big pen with a huge oversized steer in it. And each person that came into the World Fair that year, they were given a small slip of paper, and they were asked to guess the weight of the steer. And so, as you can imagine, they had little kids that were guessing, and they had ranchers that were really good at looking at steers and guessing. And they had over 10,000 people that year that guessed the weight of the steer, and whoever came the closest won the steer. And it was a really big steer, so it wasn't something that even ranchers would be really good at looking at, because it was a very oversized steer that they were guessing the weight on. After the World Fair, there was a mathematician that came in, and he wanted to take all the pieces of paper, and he wanted to collect all the information. His hypothesis was he wanted to just show just how stupid most people are, how oblivious they are about the weights of steers. And they had people that guessed 30 pounds. They had people that guessed 15,000 pounds. If you know anything about steers, both of those weights are way, way off, okay? And as he was going through trying to show just how far off most of the people were, he stumbled across a really interesting statistic, because when he took all 10,000 guesses and he put them all together and he divided by the number of papers, he found that the consensus of the 10,000 people, were within 1.5 pounds of the weight of the steer, closer than any individual guess. Now, that doesn't always happen, because someone could guess the exact weight of the steer, but we find over and over again that as we can aggregate, as we can consolidate the information, the ideas of groups tend to be far more accurate in decision making and in ideas and creativity than any individual in the group. Okay, that makes sense? The biggest, any idea what the most accurate predictor of future events is? The most accurate predictor of future events that we found so far? You won't guess this, especially in Idaho, you won't guess this. Although we're at an Indian casino, so you may guess this. The most accurate predictor of future events is gambling, believe it or not. And they're in Iowa. They have a center that does studies where people can bet on political races, and the betting on political races is far more accurate than any polling that we do. Okay, because when you're able to aggregate people's ideas, and when they put money on it, it stops all the people that are saying one thing to the pollsters and then voting differently. Even if you only put $20 on it, you don't lie and then bet $20 on it, right? You don't risk the $20. And the polls become incredibly accurate. In fact, 3 months before a race, they're 100% of the time a bit more accurate than any polls 3 months before the race. And so it's just kind of an interesting study. The largest gambling source in the United States, and actually in the world, guess what that is? The largest form of gambling in the world. No, way bigger. The stock market. Okay? And just so everybody's clear, that is absolutely just legalized gambling. And you're betting on the futures of what companies are going to do and what's going to happen. And the stock market accurately predicts economic turns, upturns, and downturns long before the market actually turns. The stock market predicts those things. It becomes very predictive of events that are going to happen in the future. So I'm going to talk about I talk a lot about leadership, and I work with some very large companies, and I work with CEOs and executive teams, and I'll share a few insights with you and I'm going to give you some specific things you can do that will radically alter the amount of information and the decision making that you'll be able to make with the people around you, not just your employees, but your friends, your family members, the people around you that have different insights than you. Today, my purpose is to teach you some ways to capture that and to aggregate the information. From my perspective, there are 2 key factors of great leaders, that if you learn to master these 2 things, then your leadership skills will skyrocket. And the first factor is the ability to aggregate the insights of the people around you. Great leaders aggregate the insights of the people around you, and then as you aggregate, the second thing great leaders do is they diversify. They diversify the groups around them. We live in a time where we, as a society, are getting particularly horrible at aggregating and diversifying. We're polarizing instead, which is the exact opposite. We tend to divide politically. If you watch the news, now we're very divided, and everybody's kind of at war, and not a lot of listening going on, not a lot of discussions going on. But we do the same thing in our businesses. So I'm going to present a couple of ideas, and I'll show you math. I like to use math because it kind of illustrates what the results are as you follow this methodology, and then I'll give you some very specific things you can do that will help you aggregate and diversify your teams in life. I believe this. This is the kind of the out there foo-foo stuff. This is an F. That all the information you need to solve whatever problems you're dealing with right now, it's all around you, and most of the time the reason we can't figure it out is because we just don't listen. We don't want to know, right? We don't want to hear it. We don't want to see it. Would rather charge down the path and be right or be smart instead of getting it right. And so let me show you a couple of things you can do that will radically alter your teams and your approach. And as you do this, it will also alter how people deal with you. Because most of the time, what we do in life is we train people how to handle us. So if our answer to everything, so I've owned quite a few companies. I owned a software company years and years ago, and it was really frustrating for me because my employees, we would have problems, and my employees would never solve the problem. They wouldn't do anything. And they would just let the problem persist, and I would have to step in every single time and say, okay, you guys have to do this. Here's how we need to fix the problem. I thought I had an employee problem, and then one day I figured out actually the problem was that I trained my employees, because every time they came to me with an idea or they came to me with a suggestion, guess how I would respond? Here's how you fix it. Or they would say, well, they had a suggestion, and the second they started talking, it's like, no, you don't understand. You're only making $12 an hour, and I am the CEO of this company, and I'm sure you don't have any ideas. I didn't say that, but I would say, no, we've done that before. We've already tried that. That's not. I never let anybody get invested in anything. I was a horrible listener. I'll tell you a story that'll preface the parts we're talking about. So there's a psychologist. He's one of the probably most famous psychologists in the United States right now. His name is Raymond Moody. Has anybody heard of him? He wrote a book back in the 1970s called Life After Life. And it was the first book that was written about the tunnels of light and people near-death experiences and all these common things that people had near-death experiences. And he was a psychologist, and he wrote the book because he thought it was interesting. He didn't have any agenda. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just thought it was interesting that all these people that had died and been brought back, there's a lot of commonality in what they described happened. Well, his book just was immediately, it drew both praise and criticism depending on where you stood on that issue. All the people that believed in some life after this, I mean, they said this proves it. This proves that religion is true and that the God thing, and all the atheists and the people who didn't believe that said this is blasphemy and this whole thing's a scam, and these people divided into two camps instantly based on what they believed prior to the book being written. And if the book confirmed what they believed, they just thought it was the greatest book ever written. And if it went against what they believed, they thought the whole book was just a giant scam and was trying to take advantage of people. And nobody actually read the book and was persuaded about anything, right? So he started a whole new field of psychology. He changed his psychology path, and he said, why do people do that? So fast forward. So a couple of years ago, I got a call from a friend of mine and said, hey, this guy named Raymond Moody, and I've never heard of him. I was in Salt Lake, and he said, this guy's speaking tonight. You ought to go listen to him. I think you'd like what he has to say. And I said, okay, I don't know who he is. And I said, thanks for letting me know, but I was busy, and I didn't want to go see him. And then I got a call from a second friend about an hour later, totally unrelated, saying, hey, this Raymond Moody guy's coming, and all the psychology people from BYU and from the University of Utah are going to go, and you ought to go listen to him. You'd really enjoy it. And I said, yeah, someone just told me about that. I've never heard of the guy, but yeah, I got other stuff going on tonight. And when I got the third call from someone else, I said, okay, I got it. I'll go. I'm supposed to go to this, listen to Raymond Moody. I walked in. I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I'm wearing cowboy boots and Levi's. And I walk in. Everybody's in suits and ties. And everybody in there is from the psychology departments of those two universities. And Raymond Moody's this guy in his late 70s, frail little guy, and I walked in right before he started speaking. There was one seat available, and I had to is at a house, and I had to walk across all these people. They were sitting on the floor and on chairs, and there was one seat on the sofa, and I sat down on that seat, and about 5 minutes into his talk, and I'm a really smart guy, and I understood about every fifth word he said. I was completely lost the entire time. And he kept talking about nonsense and how our ability to tolerate nonsense would open this portal and we could move to some other dimension. And I'm in this thing and I'm thinking, what in the heck is he talking about? And I'm sure I have ADD if I got tested for it. And it's painful for me to sit in something that I don't understand and where I'm at. And I'm thinking, man, if I didn't have to walk across all these people, I would get out of here because I can't, this is hard. And he spoke for an hour and a half about nonsense and how nonsense is the key to creativity. And I'm thinking, that sounds like nonsense to me. And as he finished speaking, I jumped up from my chair and I started leaving. And Raymond Moody made a beeline for me because I stood out like a sore thumb in this meeting. I wasn't dressed like everybody else. And he said, so what'd you think about what I said? And I said, I didn't understand it. I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, exactly. That's it. Exactly. And you stayed. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about still. Well, what are you talking about? And I said, it didn't make any sense to me. And he's like, exactly. That's it. And I'm saying, what's it? I don't know what you're saying. Right? For 3 weeks, I'm driving around in my car, like reciting the conversation. It's like, what in the heck is he talking about? And I finally came to this conclusion that our ability to this ability to tolerate nonsense is directly related. So when we find ourselves in situations where it doesn't make sense and we disagree, our ability to explore that even briefly dramatically improves our ability to solve problems and be creative. So I came up with this rule for me that I called my 2-question rule. And I started applying it in life and in my business. My 2-question rule was basically when I found myself in disagreement or I found myself something didn't make sense to me, rather than just discard it out of hand, rather than just decide, this doesn't make sense, this person's stupid, or this person doesn't get it or doesn't see the big picture. Instead, I forced myself to ask 2 questions. And in a minute, I'm going to explain why that's so critical. I forced myself to ask 2 questions. My second question was one I would figure out after the first question. My first question, I found I could be as obnoxious and rude as I wanted, and as long as I asked the question in this format, no one ever got offended. And I would say something like, you know what, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. What am I missing? And so as I added that to the end of any statement, and people, they never got offended. They wouldn't get offended that I said it was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. When I said, what am I missing? And then they would say, what is this? They would explain it to me, and here's what I found, is the vast majority of the time, I was, in fact, missing something. And as I listened and I wanted to get it, all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow. And it was, for me, like walking in a little 10-by-10 room that I thought was the whole thing, that I saw the whole picture, and all of a sudden I would walk through this door into this huge cavern. It's like, wait a second. So you're saying this? And when I let myself even explore for a few seconds longer than normal, life started to change. The biggest change that happened was people started coming to me with ideas that before I would not have heard or that they had stopped doing because I would shut things down the second they started talking. I'd be like, I wouldn't even listen to what they were saying. I'm just waiting for them to stop talking to tell them, I've already done that. I've already tried that. That won't work. And when I started, even with people making $12 an hour, that I thought, we're on different levels here. We have different insights. When they would be talking to me and I would say, so wait, that doesn't make any sense to me. So what am I missing? And they'd say, well, you're missing this. And I'd say, oh. So are you saying this? Is this what you're saying? And often what they were saying didn't even wasn't where we landed, but those brief moments of being open to seeing something different or hearing something different, those created massive transformations. So let me show you some math on this. So let's say if we were to describe ourselves, and you can tell I've done lots of circles freehand on the board, huh? If we were to describe ourselves and take all of our skills, our traits, our education, our knowledge, our information, our life experiences, and put them all, and we put a number on it. And I'm going to use a number like an IQ number. So let's say that our skills were, and that our number in life was 130. In IQ numbers, what does 130 mean? Genius, yeah, borderline genius, okay? What's the average IQ? 100. By definition, they're constantly recalibrating so that 100 is the average number, and so that half the population will be below 100 and half will be above. 130 means you're pretty smart. So let's assume that everybody in here is 130. This represents our circle. Now in life we have, let's say that we have a couple of other people. I'm going to add this person and I'm going to add this person. Let's say this person's 110 and this one's a 90, okay? So I take 3 people. It's how I deal with these circles and the groups that ultimately determines how successful we are in life, okay? And how hard we make it. So the most common way, by far, that people tend to deal with the other circles, the other people in their life, is like this. What does this diagram mean right here? How smart could that group be? 130, right? The smartest we can be is 130 because these people are inside. I see them as being inside of my circle. So basically the thought is I know everything they know and then some. So in that case, when I'm dealing with them, when I'm managing them, the way that I manage people, if I see it like this, is how? Well, I manage them. My job is to tell them what to do, right? I don't ask questions of them because I already know all the answers to that. My job is to tell these people what to do, and it's how most managers treat the people around them. Is they see their role is to figure out the problems and tell the other people what to do. And the smartest the group ever gets is the intelligence of the manager. In most teams, in most groups, that is by far the most common IQ of groups is the IQ of the leader becomes the IQ of the group. Okay? Is this ever true? Never. No, it's never true. There's not another person on the planet that you know everything they know, that you've had every experience that they've had, you've got every insight that they have. There's not another person on the planet that applies to. It doesn't matter how smart they are or what their skill set is. They have something that is outside of your circle. So instead, let's look at a true version of how this actually works. So it actually works. Let's say we got 130, and this person is 80, 10. There's the 90, and this person is 90, 20. Okay. How smart could this group be? 160, right? What has to happen in order for the group to get 160 IQ out of that group? I have to tap into this and this, right? When I hear this, and when I hear this, how am I likely to respond? This is the key part of this whole thing. How am I likely to respond when I hear this 10 points and this 20 points? I don't get it. I disagree with it. How come? It's not part of my circle. So my response initially will be, it will sound like nonsense to me. Right? It's going to sound like nonsense. And so the conditioning, the shift that has to happen in order to aggregate information is when I hear information that sounds like nonsense, my ability to explore it slightly longer than I normally do will dramatically shift my results. Okay? It'll dramatically shift my decision making. So the first concept is seeing that when I disagree, is conditioning yourself instead of assumptions. So here's my rule. This is a good rule to write down. My rule is this, is rather when I disagree with someone or something doesn't make sense, rather than assume that the other person doesn't see the big picture or is missing something, I assume that I don't see the big picture or I'm missing something. If I start with that assumption, in life you'll end up picking up IQ points from all over the place. They don't have to be employees. They can be somebody I talk to on the street. I'm going to give you several opportunities that are specific instances where you can apply this that won't make sense, but they're profound. So I'll give you here's another time that you can do this. Okay, when I find myself in voting situations, the most likely time that we've made a good decision is when it's a close vote. It's probably a reasonable decision, and the fact that a lot of people that it's 51% agree and 49% disagree, we probably had a pretty good discussion and we probably understand the issues. When I'm in a situation, if I'm in a board meeting or I'm in something where there's 13 people, so I was on a board of directors for a nonprofit, and we had two groups of people on this board. We had business people that were very successful on the board, and then we had folks that were really passionate about the purpose of this nonprofit, and I kind of referred to them as they were our barbecue planners. So when we had a planning meeting, they're the ones that made sure we had enough plates, and that they did all these details, and they loved just doing the parties and handling the mechanics, but they were on the board as well. And most of the time when we would vote on things, and the vote would be unanimous, or sometimes it would go down the lines of having the barbecue planners wanting to do one thing and the business people, making financial-based decisions or whatever, and they would vote differently. And as I was working through these concepts at one point, I stumbled on kind of an interesting idea that often, like when there's a single person or there's a really small number that disagree with a big majority, the big majority is probably missing something. Okay? Which happens a lot. And we were voting on some project. So we had another nonprofit or another group that came to us that had Elizabeth Smart's dad wanted to do this fundraiser. And so one of the financial people on the board, and usually when the financial people introduce something, the business people, the whole board just kind of went with it because they were smart and they were business folks. And he said, Ed Smart wants to do this deal with us and wants to use our nonprofit. And I don't know a lot of the details, but we would get some publicity, and it'd probably be good for us. We'd get some free marketing, and all the business people on the board are saying, yeah, it makes sense, free marketing, sounds good. We voted. It was 12-1. And the person who voted against it was a girl named Megan, and she was one of the barbecue planners, which up to this point, I would have dismissed out of hand because she was just the barbecue planner. She wasn't really smart as far as business goes, and she probably didn't know a lot. But as I'm working on this, I'm thinking, that doesn't make any sense that she would vote no. It makes no sense to me she would do that. And so I stopped. I said, hold on a second. Because Megan hadn't said a single thing in the meeting. She hadn't said one word in the meeting. I said, Megan, that makes no sense. Why would you vote no on this? I don't get it. She said, we have worked so hard to keep our nonprofit absolutely impeccable. And it makes me nervous that we're jumping into bed on something that we don't know anything about. We don't know what their purpose is. And I'm just afraid it's going to jeopardize how clean we've worked to keep, how much we've worked to keep our nonprofit super clean. And I said, that's good. That's a really good point. We really don't know enough, and we are putting our thing. We've worked really hard on keeping it clean, and we are putting it at risk. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Let's revote. Guess what the vote was? 13-0 that time against. And it wasn't even a vote against it. It was a vote it's going to be no until we get more information and we make sure of that. And we ended up not doing it because Megan, but it was Megan's vote that made no sense. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. I can't see a single reason why we shouldn't do that. And obviously you do, so I must be missing something. Okay? So when you find something like that, when you say, hey, man, there must be some IQ points that I can pick up. And so I believe at that point, we made a way better decision because we identified someone that didn't make any sense that I normally wouldn't have listened to and listened to her. So that's the first part of the concept. How much time? Where are we out on time? 11:30. Okay, 11:30. Good. It's how much time? 5 more minutes? 15 minutes? Good. Okay, great. So let's go on to the next concept. So the first concept is to learn to aggregate, to aggregate other people's ideas and concepts, and that can be, in today's politically, if we can have more conversations like that, whichever the part of the aisle you're on politically, instead of digging in heels and attacking and going to war, instead, if we had more conversations of, it makes no sense, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. What am I missing? Tell me what I'm missing. What you might find is that there's things that both sides have that we could learn from. There's things we could do that could come together, and the solutions most certainly are going to be somewhere in the middle of this whole discussion that we're having, right? And so it's an important skill as a society that we've got to start developing. So let's talk about the second concept, the concept of diversification. So years ago, I started a software company, and my software company, I was a very, very good programmer. And so I went out and I hired other very good programmers. At some point, we grew enough that I needed to bring a partner in. And I remember I had 2 guys that were kind of my finalists. One of the guys was a complete accounting nerd. He knew tons about accounting and finance, but he didn't know a lot about programming, okay? He was not cool like us programmers. And the other guy was a programmer that was somebody I knew that programmed the same language, was one of the top programmers in the country, was brilliant. He was, we could have entire conversations in acronyms, and is one of those guys. And as we talked, it was easy to talk to him. We got along. It was like we agreed on philosophy on almost everything. Of the 2, guess which one I hired? I hadn't figured this out yet. I should have, but I hired the programmer. Okay, so I ended up with a company that looked like this. So this is me, and then I went out and I hired someone that looked like that. And we agreed, and I thought at the time, well, that's a good hire. You want to hire people where you agree on things, where you work together, where you can, where you have a lot of things in common, and we can go hang out after work and talk code and talk different languages and megabits and megabytes and floppy drives and stuff. And so, but the problem is I've got my 130, and let's say he's 129. But combined we're only 133, right? I'm missing out. And this accountant guy, in retrospect, that had all this finance and guess what happened to the company? So I brought in this partner, and I'm thinking, this is awesome. We're going to be able to double. Guess what happened to the company? We grew a little bit. We struggled with something a lot. Guess what we struggled with? Money and finances and growth and marketing and sales, because we didn't have any experience in any of those things. We were really good at programming, though. We could crunch out code like crazy, but we couldn't sell it. We couldn't price it, and we couldn't build models and eventually I thought, okay, we've grown a little bit. Maybe we need another partner, and I hired and it was awesome because we never disagreed on anything. We would have meetings, and it was always unanimous. We saw everything through the same lens. In fact, the solution to all of our company problems, guess what they were? 100% of the time. Programming. We just got to add these features to our software, and as soon as we add these features, people are going to beat our door down. We don't need to have a marketing plan or a sales program. We just need to have enough features in our software. That was our solution to everything. How come we saw it like that? Because we were programmers. It's how programmers see everything. They see everything through the lens of adding features. They don't have a clue how marketing actually works. They just think if you get enough features, everybody will buy your software. So So let's look at building effective teams. So if there's two kinds of people that you could have. Is this person like you or not like you? Like you, okay? Like-minded, like-skilled. You got a few points. This person like you or not like you? Not like you. Which one adds the most IQ to your team? This one. Which one's the most frustrating to talk to? This one. Okay? So let's talk about what this means. However, if I can build a team, so there's a lot of the talk and the training today is about diversity and inclusion. And the focus point is that the reason you diversify and the reason you want to include people is because it's the right thing to do. Like, that's not why you do it. It's the smart thing to do. You diversify and you include people that are different than you because you expand the IQ of your teams and of your organization. You'll make way better decisions if what? If what? If you diversify because diversification by itself does not solve the problem. You have to do two things. You have to diversify and then you have to aggregate. Which means, and so I'm going to give you, there's a word that I use, because often we diversify, and diversify we're not talking, race is one thing, that's what, a lot of times we talk about diversity, that's what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about, so I'm a raging optimist. In life, I don't have that gene. I find the good in just about any situation and anything. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's just a thing. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, because there's times that it's one of my best traits, and there's times it gets me into massive amounts of trouble, because I charge into battles that I have no possible way to win, but I'm an optimist, and so I go in and I will go down to the death thinking that we can figure this out and we can solve this problem. When I start a new business, guess who my first hire is? 100% of the time. My first optimist, my first hire is a raging pessimist. Not just a normal pessimist, but a raging pessimist. Someone that will offset my optimism. Now, just hiring a pessimist doesn't solve the problem, because every time we sit in a meeting, if I am constantly saying, dude, you've got to quit being such a pessimist about everything, then I am basically neutralizing the opportunity to pick up IQ points. And if he's sitting in the meeting saying, man, you've got to quit being so optimistic about everything, instead, when I say, listen, I love your pessimism, I honor it. And in fact, your job here is to be pessimistic. And when I come up with ideas, your job is to shoot holes in them. My job is to solve the holes you shoot in them. And we're going to go down this path, and you're going to shoot holes, and I'm going to solve problems. And at the end, you're going to shoot holes that I can't patch or fix, and then we'll say, whew, good thing we didn't do that. That was probably a bad idea. Or I'm going to solve all the problems, and you won't be able to punch more holes in it, and together we can say, this is probably a really good idea, because the pessimist can't figure out where it could go wrong. Does that make sense? And when we honor what each person brings, often I go into meetings where we have, I love hiring women. I love hiring women. How come? Yeah, I got the dude perspective down. I got that down. And most of the time, we're selling things to women, and we're selling products and services that we have a big chunk of it that's going to women. And when I walk in and I'm consulting with a company and they're struggling, and I walk in and they're all 45-year-old white guys sitting around the table in suits and ties, and they all look like they could be brothers, and I'm saying, I can tell you part of your problem right now. There's no diversity. You guys will agree on everything, but you see this single lens. You see everything through this single lens, and your marketing ideas are really lame, and your target markets and your growth are lame. And sometimes it means you bring a woman in, and if you've got 4 guys on your board, you intentionally go out and say, I want to hire somebody, as you look at your team and you say, we need more age on our team. I need more gray hair. I need more youth. I need a millennial on our team that has that perspective. I need men. I need women. I need racial diversity. I need diversity of economic diversity. And as you start picking people on your team and bringing them in and saying, well, often I bring a woman in. If if I'm weighted heavily with men, I'll bring a woman in and say, okay, there's 4 guys. We're going to be talking about marketing. You have 5 votes. So basically, we'll do our best to persuade you. You'll do our best to persuade us. And at the end of the day, you win. It's like, that's how this is going to go down, because I want to capture that IQ. I want to capture, it's not, I want to weight it and build my teams. And when you go out and you're looking as you expand your teams, as you're saying, what are our holes? What are we missing? What are parts of us that we have these big, massive blind spots? And how do we bring people in and even assign them roles and say, your job is to, this thing you're really good at, rather than try and make everything homogenous, which is what we like to do, as you love it, and if you bring in someone who's African American, bring them in and say, your job is to be African American in here. Your job is to represent your culture and your upbringing and the roots, so that we have those insights as we're designing products and as we're designing marketing. You get to speak for the parts of you that we don't have those insights. Like, you get to be like, stand up and fight for those things. And you get to fight for your pessimism, and I'm going to fight for the optimism, and you're going to fight for female, and you're going to fight for youth, and you're going to fight for the older people, and I want you to bring those insights so we can, and we're all going to listen to each other, and we're going to synthesize and aggregate. Does that make sense? Here's a couple of other tips. So I've given you one. The one I gave you, the first one, if you have a challenge, here's the one I would, if you want to play with this and see how it changes things. For 2 weeks, make a commitment that when you find yourself in disagreement or not understanding something, do the 2-question thing. You'll find in 2 weeks that the people around you will change their behaviors. They'll start bringing you ideas and solving problems in ways that they don't right now. As you find yourself in situations where you have lopsided votes, a third one is silence. When you're in situations, in group situations, and people are throwing their ideas, often when someone hasn't said anything, as a leader, when you say, Nancy, you haven't said anything. Where are you at on this? What are you thinking? Be prepared to be odd, because the person who is not saying anything most likely is seeing both sides of the issue better than anybody else in the room. And they'll be able to put words on it, and they'll be able to move the room, and it's a leader's job to pull the insights from people that are silent. Okay? And the last thing is when you're invested in something. So when it was your idea, it was your thing, and you were massively invested in it, that's a great time to say, okay, I'm really invested in this. It's important to me to see it the way I see it. That's a really good sign that when somebody's disagreeing, when you're really invested in something, the ability to say, you know what, I'm really invested in this. So what am I missing? Here's the last question you can ask. I'm giving you some questions. Barbara Bush, how are we doing on time? 4 minutes, great. So Barbara Bush, when George Bush was elected president, Barbara Bush inherited this first lady thing that they do where they pick a cause, and she didn't really have one up to that point. The cause that she picked was literacy that she wanted to promote, similar to how Melania Trump is doing the Be Your Best campaign. Well, Barbara Bush's was literacy. So she got asked to speak at this huge conference on literacy. And she had prepared this speech and had all these speech writers who had done this speech, and she's getting nervous, super nervous. She was not comfortable speaking in public. There's a couple thousand people there, and she said, right before she got out, because these are all experts on literacy, and this is a cause she just kind of picked up a few weeks before that. So she's feeling completely inadequate to speak at this conference. And as she walked out, she had a brilliant idea, and I use this a lot. And to get IQ and to pick up IQ from people around me is she walked out, she set her speech down, and she said, I have a prepared speech, and I'm not going to give my speech though. Instead, I have a question for you as an audience. So she got a couple thousand people there, and she said, if you were married to the President of the United States and had all the power associated with being the wife of the president, what's the first thing you'd do to solve this literacy thing? And for the next hour, she just listened. And so the last question that helps me tap into the IQ of the people around me is I take my position or my situation, And if I'm talking to a frontline customer service person, it creates a powerful conversation to say, listen, I know you're just in customer service. If you were the CEO of this company, though, if you were in my shoes, if you're the CEO of this company, and you wanted to change the customer experience and improve the customer experience, what's the very first thing that you would do? And when I ask questions like that, and I let people juxtapose, and I get amazing feedback. And when I ask it because I want to hear it, and I want to listen, and I want to do it, if I ask the questions and I let people tell me that are outside of me, I go up to, I'll go up to people I meet on airplanes, or I'll go up to people that come and stay at my guest house. And often if we're talking about something and I tell them, if you were in my shoes, here's my shoes as I see them. If you're in my shoes, what would you do here? And I'm able to aggregate and pick up little tidbits of information. So that's my challenge. Go out and make your team smarter. Go out and find ways to diversify. If you find yourself lopsided, doesn't mean you have to go fire people. As you bring in new people, give them weighted voices. So weight the voices and the insights that new people bring. Let them represent the groups that they're great at. And you'll find your ability to be creative and make decisions will go through the roof. So thank you for coming.